Hey guys, my name is Dee, this is Heroine's Corner and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about non-fiction. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the non-fiction books that I want to try and read this year because I've been trying to get more into non-fiction and I'm finding that I really enjoy non-fiction actually. So I really just want to explore more different types of non-fiction. So the books I'm going to talk about, I don't think any of them are Black British. I kind of want to do a separate video to that because there's like a lot of Black British non-fiction books that I actually want to get to, so I want to make that a separate video in itself. In this video we have a lot of different types of fiction here, so I can't wait to tell you guys about it, but let's just get straight into the video as always. So first book I want to talk about is a book that basically inspired me to do this video because I'm really excited to read this book, and that's Empire Land by Sathnam Sanghera. So this book basically is about the British Empire. We're just seeing how the empire or the history of empire still affects Britain today, and I've been seeing this so much. It's not that big of a book, to be honest. It's really it's an actual really short book about the British Empire, so I feel like this is just more going to be more social commentary based than actually like the history of the empire and like really and crucial historical moments. I feel like this is just going to be a commentary about how the empire is still important and how it has a legacy when it comes to like talking about racism and colonization and all these different topics. So the next book I want to talk about is African Europeans: An Untold History by Olivet Atele. So this is a history book basically talking about African Europeans, because in the West, specifically in Europe, we have this weird kind of idea that like African, like to be African is not to be like European. There's a lot of like space between those two different identities, when in reality Africa and Europe has obviously been in a being intertwined for many centuries now because of colonization and because of slavery, but also before then when we're just talking about the Roman Empire. So in this book I think we're just detailing like there's like many different like histories of different African Europeans, and also just seeing the kind of presence of Africans in Europe and what that meant for Europe. And I feel like we go all the way until like present day, and we're talking about the migration of Africans into Europe more recently in the 21st century. So I really can't wait to read this book. So the next book I want to talk about is There Were Her Property by Stephanie Jones Rogers. So this is again a history book. This is a US history book, and it's talking about the relationship between white women and slavery, and how they were, you know, they were a part of the slave trade too, basically in the US. And it seems like in history we kind of just focus on the male slave owners, and we don't kind of remember that white women also owned slaves and were brutal and were very like a part of this evil chapter in history. So yeah, I feel like it's just an interesting side to the slave trade that I haven't really read about or learned much about, so I can't wait to read this book. So the next book I want to talk about is The Lesbo of Shanghai by Helen Zia, or Ia, I'm not quite sure about the pronunciation, sorry, but this book basically is about the mass migration out of China when Mao's revolution was dying, and it's a very it's pretty much a biographical account of 4 different individuals who are part of this mass migration and what it just meant for them, their families, and still for their descendants that are living in America today. Obviously, you know that Mao's revolution was really destructive and had a lot of far-reaching consequences, but I just have never read a kind of like a biographical account about the people who were trying to escape China at that time, because I feel like sometimes when it comes to history books it's hard to connect with the actual personal stories and of these people and so on and so forth. So I feel like it being biographical would just add to that layer of impact, and for the messages that the author wants to put out, for it to really sink in. So the next book is also from Asia as well, and we have The Girl in the Picture by Denise Chong. So this is a biographical book about the girl in that infamous picture in the Vietnam War, about a little girl running, and I think it's like napalm like burning off her clothes and stuff like that. So this is a biographical account of that girl and her life, and how that picture really changed her life as well. This picture basically like made her famous, so I'd really like to see how that affected her, and like all the opportunities she got from this picture, but also obviously dealing with the trauma of being in this really deadly and destructive war. The next book is Inglorious Empire by Shashi Tharoor, and this is a book about the British Empire again, specifically about the British Empire's effect on India. And this book has been on my radar for a while now, and because I really wanted to know more about the British Empire when it came to India. What really drew me to this book is this line, which basically says, in the 18th century, India's share of the world's economy was as large as Europe's. By 1947, after 2 centuries of British rule, it had decreased sixfold. So I just want to know the history of that. I really want to know the nitty gritty. What the hell did the British Empire do in India? Because obviously this still has like long far-reaching effects on like just today's politics. Next we have How We Go Home, and this is actually an anthology of different I think this is North American indigenous people and their perspectives on just contemporary issues that are happening in the indigenous community. So yeah, I think this is both in the USA and in Canada. I think that's where most of these kind of stories and accounts come from, and I think a lot of these writers are younger writers as well, so we're following like young indigenous people. So in the UK we don't really think about indigenous issues like that. We don't have like an indigenous community like other places in the world do, like Australia, Canada, USA. I know that the indigenous communities in those countries do suffer a lot at the hands of the governments of those countries. So I just want to educate myself about these different issues because they're obviously really important, and I've heard that this anthology is just really good, and the young perspective has really drew me to this anthology in particular. So yeah, this is just me trying to educate myself about different people that may not be at the forefront of my life and my country's politics. That doesn't mean I don't need to be aware of other issues that other communities are having in the world too. Then we have Three Mothers, how the mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin shaped a nation. I just want to read this book where these women's stories are being brought into the foreground and how much impact mothers do have on their children, especially like black motherhood, like in this time, in the 20th century as well. It just seems like there'll be a lot of interesting social commentary and issues that are being discussed. And I don't know much about the mothers of these really important people. We rarely see history from the perspective of motherhood, and especially black motherhood. So it just feels like there'll be a very interesting perspective. The next book I want to talk about is There Was a Country by Chinua Achebe, and if you don't know, Chinua Achebe is the author of Things Fall Apart, which is obviously a widely acclaimed novel about Nigeria in the pre-colonial times. And in this book we basically get an account of the Biafran War, and if you don't know, the Biafran War is the Nigerian Civil War, which took place in the 1960s. So I don't know much about this civil war. My dad was born right after this, so like he doesn't have a lot of memories about it. I am trying to read more books about Nigerian history, so this just seemed like the perfect book to read. So I really want to read this history, and especially because it's coming from Chinua Achebe, and I really enjoyed Things Fall Apart, and I feel like he's a marvelous writer, so I want to see Nigerian history through his eyes. And then lastly, we have Not My Time to Die by Yolande Mukangasana. I'm really sorry if I butchered that last name, but this is a book that is basically set, which is basically about the Rwandan genocide which occurred. And obviously this was a very evil chapter of history and what went on in the Rwandan genocide. And in this book we basically get a account of the Rwandan genocide from a survivor. I have never read a book about this because it is such a brutal kind of thing that happened in history, and I feel like it would be a lot of things that happened are just like very graphic and very just evil and vile. But it's also important to remember this type of history and to understand it, and to just keep the accounts of the survivors alive. And we need these personal stories to just remind us that these were real people that were going through these very challenging chapters in history, so I do want to read this book. That is it for today's video, guys. Please let me know if you're interested in any of these books, or if there's any books that you'd recommend for me to read, and I'll see you guys soon on another video. Remember to like and subscribe. Bye.